Hello, and welcome to MathVR, a virtual reality space for learning and doing math. Okay, today we're going to talk about convex functions. Now, you might be wondering, why do I care about convex functions, and what are they? Well, convex functions today are used in a lot of different applications, such as like when you have you're a store owner and you want to set the optimal price for your products. So you want to like solve some sort of optimization problem and say like, what's the price I should set? Or let's say you're a doctor and you want to figure out what kind of treatment you suggest to someone. You want to solve an optimization problem given some constraints and then be like, okay, here's the optimal treatment. What's nice about convex functions are they have a global solution. So that means, and they have no local minimum. So that means that when you solve these things, you get the global solution subject to some cost function and constraints, which is very nice. So if you can model as convex, you can potentially get optimal solutions. Okay, so let's start talking about MathVR and how we're going to learn about convex functions today. Alright, so first off, these are my hands. We're using the Leap motion tracker, so it's just doing hand tracking. It's a little in beta, so bear with me a little bit, but I think it will get better in time. And this is the heads-up display that we got going on. So here's a vector times the matrix times a vector, and that function is plotted right here. Little cute dude. And it's a convex function because it has only one minimum, and it's quadratic because it's only described by a quadratic function, which is v times a times v transpose. Now, besides this, the vector, up on the bottom we have a eigenvalue decomposition of this matrix. Now, if you're not familiar with eigenvalues or eigenvalue decomposition, you might want to read up a little bit on it before watching this, just because it's going to make it a little bit more sense. But hopefully this will give you some better intuition. Okay, so eigenvalues essentially control the scale of the function, and eigenvectors control the principal axes. So as you can see right now, as I rotate, I'm actually changing the principal axes of the function. Okay. And if I want to change, so you can see how that changes it. And principal axes are basically the direction it lies on. But you notice the function in size and scale doesn't ever change. Now I'm going to try and do this manipulation here to change the actual scale of the function. There you go. Now it's a lot taller and bigger because I made the eigenvalues just bigger. But let's see if we can show what happens if we made this ratio between eigenvalues larger. So stretching it out a little bit. All right, there we go. That's a good one. So as you can see now, the ratio is really large because you have 1.4 to 0.004. And what that means is you have a very elongated ellipsoid because one of the principal components is scaled a lot larger than the other one. And as you can see, as I rotate too, you can see as I rotate these principal components how it changes the orientation of the matrix. But the actual size doesn't change because that's controlled by the scale and the eigenvalues. Now, that blue line is gradient descent, which we would now talk about over here. So, like I said before, optimization is really great because you can solve these optimal solutions. The problem is you have to figure out how to solve it. And that's where gradient descent comes in. So if you look back to your calculus and you remember what a derivative is, the idea is essentially you take a derivative of a function, and then you add this term called the learning rate to that derivative, and you go downwards and you try and hit the minimum. And it's basically like you're playing golf, where at each point you hit that function in the direction of your gradient by the power of your learning rate. So let's say we want to increase the power that we hit it by. Okay. So by doing this with one of the interactions we have of going this way, as you can see, now we just hit the power a lot. So now it actually it starts up pretty high, hits it really low, and then hits it across. Because your learning rate's really high now. Here actually the learning rate's so high that you have this unique solution just going off to infinity. Now imagine that you hit golf, but you're really bad at golf and you just completely miss. Okay, so let's try and change the position of where we start. And also, let's try and decrease the learning rate, because maybe you shouldn't be using a drive right now. There we go. Okay, so let's say you hit it here, and then here, and hit it here. Now, is this the good solution? Probably not, because yes, it is getting to the bottom, but it takes many hits, you know? You want to, like, going back to our golf metaphor, you want to obviously do it as little hits as possible, because that's computational time. So you would want to, like, decrease your learning rate. Okay. And yeah, there we go. This is much better. And also you can change where you initialize. So initialization is a big part of having a faster solution. If you initialize close to the bottom, obviously you're going to converge faster. But most of the time you can't really control where you initialize. So it's kind of just you have to accept that's going to be random. Okay, so let's look at some other functions and try and optimize them. Now going back. So we looked at this very elongated ellipsoid type. But what happens if we have more like better condition? If the ratio of eigenvalues was similar? Like this bowl. This looks pretty easy to optimize. Not really that steep, kind of just go to the center. And you actually find that, yeah, that's true. If you have these nice symmetric eigenvalues, it's very easy to actually just optimize it. And yeah, see, it just goes right down, can change it, and it's not really, it's robust to differences in the learning rate. And starting position. Start anywhere, it just goes straight down. Very nice. Okay, what about other functions? Well, you might be wondering, if these eigenvalues control the sphere of my principal components, what happens if I set one of the principal components to 0? I.e., one of the eigenvalues goes to 0. We have a positive semi-definite matrix. Well, let's try and do that right now. It's a little tricky, but there we go. Okay, so as you can see, one of the interesting phenomena is you now have what's called a null space. And what that means is there's a space where you can times this vector v by, there's an infinite amount of vectors v that times this matrix will lead to it being 0. So before we had one global solution, now we have an infinite amount of global solutions, and you can see this because this runs off to infinity. It's pretty cool. So it's just like, get some better views of it, go around, going under a function, but should have been under a function. And yeah, so this is pretty awesome. So now, let's bring back our hands and go into the optimization techniques. Okay. Alright, so as you can see, this is interesting because no matter where I start, the optimization knows just to go to the bottom. And that's what the gradient tells you is, hey, I'm infinite small solutions, just go downwards anywhere and you'll be fine. So now it just quickly goes to the center of the trough, and that's an optimal solution to the problem. You might have other constraints and stuff that would be like, oh, like, you know, I don't want a vector as big as infinity times infinity, but that doesn't really matter right now. In this is the quadratic case, all these solutions are valid and globally optimal. Okay, so that kind of highlights some of the interactions we have in MathVR and how you can actually use your hands and virtual reality to control and manipulate math. Hopefully you got some intuition today for gradient descent, eigenvectors, and eigenvalues. If not, then we have some more work to do. But, oh well. Okay.